Glory, glory to old Georgia.
Heroes have graced the field before you.
With hearts, bodies, and minds
for which the entire Bulldog nation can be justifiably proud.
The tradition that spans more than a full century.
And now, as one chapter ends, a new one begins.
A new breed of Bulldog stands ready to take the field.
To continue that tradition.
Understanding that there is no tradition more worthy of envy.
No institution worthy of such loyalty.
As we prepare for another meeting between the hedges,
let all the Bulldog faithful rally behind the men and women who now wear the red and black.
With two words, two simple words that express the sentiments of the entire Bulldog nation.
Good evening. I am Jaquarius Ragland, a proud member of UGA's class of 2022. I'm originally from Thomaston, Georgia, and currently double majoring in biology and intended health promotion with a pre-med intent and a minor in African American studies. I'm the vice president of alumni engagement for UGA's Student Alumni Council, the high school outreach co-chair for Georgia Day's minority recruitment, and a peer educator in the Division of Academic Enhancement. Following graduation, I plan to enroll in medical school to earn a MD, PhD, and become a neurosurgeon. For University of Georgia Bulldogs, learning doesn't end when the diploma arrives in the mail. We're a community of lifelong learners, and we're committed to growing and to inquiring into the nature of things. We're spirited and passionate between the hedges and between the pages. We're curious, open-minded, and ready to explore new worlds and voices. The UGA Alumni Association offers programming like this event that helps to connect our nearly 335,000 alumni around the world. We encourage lifelong learning, and we have a lot of fun doing it. Between the Pages provides alumni with the opportunity to enjoy and discuss works by alumni authors with fellow Bulldogs every other month. Tonight is our 5th event, and it's in collaboration with UGA's Community Reading Program, a multi-year effort that provides the campus community with the opportunity to read and discuss books that promote the exchange of diverse ideas addressing topics of race, ethnicity, and community. A special thank you to the Georgia Athletic Association and the Presidential Task Force on Race, Ethnicity, and Community for providing 500 free copies of In My Place to students, and welcome to my fellow students. Charlayne Hunter-Gault is an award-winning journalist with 50 plus years in the industry. In 1961, 60 years ago, she and Hamilton Holmes became the first Black students to enroll at UGA. Her resume is impressive and includes positions with the New York Times, PBS's McNeil Lehrer News Hour, National Public Radio, and CNN International in Johannesburg. And numerous awards have come her way, including 2 Peabodys. The building where Hunter-Gault and Holmes took their first steps on campus is now named the Holmes-Hunter Academic Building in honor of their great legacy. In 1985, UGA established the Holmes-Hunter Lecture, which focuses on race relations, civil rights, and education. 10 years ago, this pioneering alumna dedicated her papers to UGA's Richard B. Russell Library. This year, as we reflect on 60 years of desegregation, she is joining us for a number of virtual events, including this one. And if she hasn't done enough for our university, she and her husband, Ron, endowed the Giving Voice to the Voiceless Fund to inspire UGA students to pursue a more just society. We'll hear more about their commitment later on in the evening. Angelique Jackson, a 2012 UGA grad, will moderate tonight's event. She is a film and media reporter for Variety and is based in Los Angeles. Prior to joining Variety, she was a producer for Entertainment Tonight. There, she earned 3 Daytime Emmy Awards for her work. I am also pleased to share that Angelique is a former member of the UGA Student Alumni Council. Angelique will lead a discussion with Charlayne for 30 minutes or so, and afterwards, there will be time for you to submit questions. So please be thinking about what you'd like to ask.
Well, thank you so much for that incredible introduction, Jaquarius. I wish that we could obviously all be there together on campus, but I will take this. Being able, as both a Black woman and alum of the University of Georgia, and of course, a Grady College of Journalism graduate, it is my absolute honor to be leading this conversation and to be speaking to you, Miss Charlayne Hunter-Gault. Hello.
Hello, and how honored I am to be with you.
Well, this has been a really lovely experience. I know we were talking a little bit in the green room beforehand, just getting a chance to revisit your book, getting a chance to look back on those words that you wrote, and what has it been like kind of rereading this and knowing that the students and the viewers today have also been rereading your words and looking back at your history?
Well, it took me way back, back to my early days, but it was very exciting because as I said earlier, this is what I did this time around. I said, oh, wow, did I write that? But what I think is important that something important that so many people who come from the years back that I have come from is that we can see things that are repeating themselves, but we can also see solutions. And so that's why I have so many I started doing little pieces of with my pen, but I thought, well, maybe I'll do it this way because I can get to them faster. But I really enjoyed that walk back because it also took me back to my parents and the people who meant so much to me growing up, and help reinforce my ongoing belief that history is one of the most important things. In fact, history provides our armor to go forward, no matter what our no matter what our challenges are.
And you wrote about that too recently in an op-ed for the New York Times, the importance of learning our history really for everyone, for all Americans, not just for us as journalists, but the importance of taking a look at things and really trying to understand that cyclical nature that tends to happen. Talk to me about how your book, In My Place, kind of serves as a way to help others remember this very important time in our history and in your history.
Well, we hear a lot these days about the divisions in the country and the fact that people don't want to talk to one another and don't want to understand the position of the other one. Like you hear a lot about Black Lives Matter, and you hear some people saying, but all lives matter. And I think that when you go into the history of particularly the Black experience, and see what is happening today, let's just say even with the coronavirus, the disproportionate impact it's having on people of color. I think that if you had an opportunity to explain things like that to people who resent the phrase Black Lives Matter, it might make a difference. And yet it takes time. But you got to be willing to take the time. I take the time in the grocery store. I love talking to people. And I think that although I wear my mask, my UGA mask, by the way, my husband wore it today, so I don't know where he put it. But I think that it may be the hair. I don't know what it is, but people, even with the mask on, tend to recognize me. And so I have conversations with them. I talk to people because I think that's important to communicate. And that's what we journalists, as you surely know, our job is to communicate. And, you learned at the University of Georgia, the words of Edward R. Murrow, this instrument, he was referring specifically to television, but I think it applies to all media. This instrument can teach. It can illuminate, it can inspire, but it can only do so to the extent that human beings are willing to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it becomes merely lights and wires in a box. Now, you have had such an extraordinary career, so you have lived those words. And I think UGA School of Journalism helped prepare you to live those words.
Yes.
Helped prepare me. That's why I wanted to go there in the first place. 16 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, that is also one of the just most amazing things about your experience is that you, from an incredibly young age, knew that you wanted to be a journalist. You knew that it was something that, you know, you loved reading and writing. You write about how you lived in a dictionary when you were a young girl. What was it about reading and writing and telling stories? What was it that you loved so much about it?
Well, I think I was initially, you know, my father was in the military, serving at that time a country that didn't serve him. But at any rate, that's neither here nor there. We can go to that later. But I was mostly raised by my mom and my grandmother. And they were church-going people. They were people of faith. And they also loved education. And they loved reading. My mother used to read a book a day. And I think I talked about that in the book. And so I was surrounded by role models that were critical to my development and my growing up. And I got the inspiration to become a journalist, sitting at the feet of my grandmother, who I must have been 5 to 6 years old. And she was reading, we lived in Covington, Georgia, and she took the Atlanta Constitution, the Atlanta Daily World, and I don't know if I think there might have even been a local paper, but I sat there waiting for the Atlanta Constitution comic strips at 5 years old. And it was at that point that I fell in love with Brenda Starr. And that was my first inspiration. And I used to go around saying I wanted to be Brenda Starr. And I said, my mother said that no little black girl was going to be Brenda Starr. And I said, well, when I told my mother that I wanted to be Brenda Starr, she didn't say that's not what little black girls do. She said, if that's what you want to do. And it was just that casual. And yet it sunk into my head that, okay, that's what I want to do. Now, of course, the older I got and the more our schools, our black segregated schools, taught us our history, I learned about Ida B. Wells and her pioneering role in championing the rights of Black people, championing the right to vote. And again, that's why our history is so important, because right now we have a situation where there are efforts to curtail our ability to vote. That is, people of color. And what people need to know is that you have to fight this. You can't just sit back and say, oh my God, they've curbed our ability to vote. We have a history of fighting for the right to vote, and it has paid off. And I think that sometimes the atmosphere gets so challenging that people get tired. But you can't feel no ways tired. That's what the song says.
And also throughout history, we have seen that these movements have often been led by young people all across the spectrum, whether it be from the sit-ins to, in your case, desegregating the university. When you look at the young people of today, and also just, you know, looking back on how you ended up involved in the movement and seeing your classmates, the other young, you know, heading to college students around you really make such a difference. You know, what do you say to young people now, and what does it mean to see so many young people now really standing up and speaking out?
I mean, I don't have to say anything to them because they're out there. I mean, they don't need me to say anything. But at the same time, you know, it's just like when you go out in the morning for your morning exercise, when you're walking your dog, or when you're just walking to get some exercise, you get tired. And I think that what our history tells us from the experiences of the civil rights generation of my generation, because when I was at University of Georgia, students from the Atlanta Committee for Cooperative Action were demonstrating in the streets in Atlanta, and they had followed the students in Nashville who had the first sit-ins at the lunch counters, and they were inspiring others to join them, and yet they had the support of some of the older Black people were nervous because they were afraid for their children. They were afraid they were going to be attacked or hurt or whatever. But for the most part, they had support of the older people in the community. Like Hamilton Holmes and I were chosen, actually, to apply to the University of Georgia by a group of slightly older Black men. They were professionals. One, M. Carl Holman, was a professor at Clark College, and Clinton Warner was a doctor, and Jesse Hill was head of a Black insurance company. And they felt it was time that the 1954 Brown decision was tested in Atlanta, because the decision was in 1954, and here it was 1959, and nobody had actually tested it. So they came to our high school and asked if there were any top students who would be interested, because they didn't want to have any excuse for any student that they got to apply to be turned down. And that's when we were chosen. So I like the phrase, and I probably used it far too much, but I'm very supportive of this younger generation and the things that they're doing, and your younger generation, I'm supportive of you. At the same time, so it's not a but, it's a semicolon. At the same time, I think that for us to continue to move forward on the path towards a more perfect union, we need a coalition of the generations. We need to be able to listen to some of the older people. I have a friend, Reverend Otis Moss Jr. His son is Otis Moss III, and we go to his church every Sunday online. He's in Chicago, and he's so cool and so hip. And he did some great sermons during Black History Month, and he also did some great ones during Women's History Month. And so my husband and I listen to him every Sunday, but the person I call and talk to on the phone is his daddy, Otis Moss Jr. Now I think he's 85 now. And it's just wonderful to talk to him and hear him reminisce about Atlanta and about people like Donald Hollowell, who was our attorney, and people in the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King. He knew all of those people. And it continues to inspire me, because, with the challenges that we all have, we need ongoing inspiration to keep on keeping on.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, when reading your book, I think will find some of that inspiration, because in really learning more about your story and learning more about the way that you found your place, as the title refers to, we really get into the background of your family's history, and how there was a search among your parents for their place in the story as well. Tell me a little bit about how your family, that support system, played such a role in creating who you are today, and also who you were when you stepped foot on campus at the University of Georgia in 1961.
Well, as I said, my grandmother was a reader. She had been taken out of school in the 3rd grade because her mom had actually had a bad experience with the white family that she was working for. And it's in the book. I won't go into it now. But she needed help to clean houses and things like that. But she never gave up wanting to be educated. So she continued to educate herself. On the other side of my family, my father's people, my grandfather was what they call a preacher's preacher. He was a presiding elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And he used to tell his sons, get an education, boys, because that's going to be the key to your liberation. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that was, I can't even count right now the number of years that was, when I was still growing up. And my mom would send me to Florida in the summers to get some of that old time religion.
Yeah.
And it was pretty amazing how I didn't want to learn the Bible verses that she wanted me to learn every day, because she went to church every day at noon to pray. And the parsonage, the preacher's house, was right next door to the church. So it was a quick walk. But I used to climb the mango tree. So she couldn't find me when she got out of church. She couldn't find me to take me to church. And she couldn't find me when she got out of church. But at some point she would find me and she would make me learn Bible verses. And I never really I learned them because I had taught to be respectful of my elders, but I never really appreciated it until the night, I think it was the third night on campus at the university, when the students rioted. And the riot was so disturbing and it just blew up the campus, as well as our admission, because the dean came and said that we were being suspended for our own safety. Now, of course, Hamilton lived with the Black family, the Killians, in town, so he didn't know the riot was happening until I got there. But when I came out, the crowds had been dispersed with tear gas. I mean, the police took their time getting there, but when they finally did get
out there,
yeah, they dispersed the crowds with tear gas. So the next day, my picture was in the paper, and the journalists came to our house to ask about that night, and how frightening it was. It must have been really frightening. And I said no, and I hadn't focused on why it wasn't frightening, because I wasn't lying. It wasn't frightening. And I had to think about it. And suddenly I realized deep in the recesses of my memory was one of those Bible verses that my grandmother had taught me. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Now, I've been through in a lot of different denominations. I left the AME church, although I still relate to it, and I've had a moment with Catholicism and various other religions. But the thing I have as a result of all of that is faith. And as you know, we recently lost one of the people who helped me into the University of Georgia, Vernon Jordan. And I was very sad for a while that he had left us. But I got over it because I knew that he was a person of faith, and that people of faith, like I learned in South Africa, they never use the word DEAD or DEATH. Yeah. They say people have transitioned. And so I was sad for a moment, but then I thought about the fact that he was a person of faith. He had transitioned, and he was now an ancestor with so many others who had preceded him, including Don Hollowell and Constance Baker Motley and Horace Ward, who were the legal team that fought to get us into the University of Georgia. So they're all ancestors, and their history is there to inform us about the kinds of things that we still need to do to ensure that everybody has the rights that are guaranteed in our Constitution, regardless of race, creed, color, or national origin, because we're having these issues these days with Asians. But our Constitution guarantees all of us equality. And I think that that's part of what our history can teach us, how what the Constitution promises, and yet what we have to do to fulfill that promise.
Well, since we're on the topic of Vernon and also speaking about the legal team, in rereading your memories of taking those first steps near the arch, for anyone who's looking to find this part in the book, when you go to page 172 and you so brilliantly describe the way that you drove into Athens and how you were, taking your first steps onto campus as if you knew your place, only this time, for the first time, it would be you who is defining that place on your terms, on territory that was their pride, but was now mine too. When I think all of us remember the first time we got to UGA, but I feel like our experience and your experience in particular is so singular. When you went back and read it again this time, what stuck out to you about that moment? Can you describe that experience, those first steps near the arch?
Well, so many people, and I'm grateful for this, have looked at the 60th anniversary and asked me to go back and think about it and so forth. And one of the questions continues. One of the questions that I keep hearing is, how did you feel when you were walking through? And, the students were yelling ugly things and you didn't know how dangerous it was. And yet you looked so calm. And I thought about it, and we really were calm. I mean, there was Vernon, tall and moving forward, and there was my little short mother, because there was one point when we were walking across the campus and my mother, Vernon's tall, I'm tall, and we're striding across over from the registrar's office, which is now the Holmes Hunter building, over to the J School. And we were just going fast. And my mother said, hey, wait a minute, I'm not as tall as you are. And we slowed down. But no, we were focused. We were focused on why we were there. And when I look back at myself, I look at some of those pictures and I try to remember, what I was thinking. And what I was thinking was, we got work to do here. We got to get in here and register, because this is what we're here for. And I think that, excuse me, I think part of that confidence came from Don Hollowell, came from Constance Baker Motley, who had been such a role model. I mean, when they argued the case that December down there in Athens before Judge Boodle, she was tough as nails. And I remember, I think I quoted this in the book, where she asked somebody a question, and I think it was the registrar who was in the chair, and they said, look at him, he has no idea what's about to hit him. And it was true. I mean, she just was so well prepared that they were my role models. And in a way, I couldn't let them down. But also, I wanted to go to the University of Georgia, not to make history, but to do what you're doing now and to do what I've done for the past 50 some odd years. I wanted to be a journalist, and this was the place. And so that was what I was focused on, not the ugly words I was hearing or not the ugly acts, but getting through this day of registration and moving on to get my degree in journalism.
For anyone looking for that quote, because it was one that I immediately highlighted, it's on page 161, and it's just a brilliant, beautiful description piece of writing. You write, it happened with the university registrar, a small weasel-like man who appeared stooped from carrying the white man's burden. It is such a descriptive sentence that I just immediately said, the whole time you're reading this book, you feel like you are getting this understanding that you could never really get from reading the newspaper clippings or watching the news clips. Really getting to hear your voice in this story is, I think, what will make so much of a difference to people. The other, my other favorite line from your book is, I wanted to be famous one day, but not simply for going to college. Talk to me. Yes, please talk to me about that perspective and that experience of having been at the center of the news, but then, of course, as a journalist, being able to use your position to continue to create change.
Well, I had some role models. I watched the reporters watching me, And we had a conversation with Calvin Trillin a few weeks ago on the UGA air. And he was one of the role models. I watched him watch me. And I watched the good ones and I watched the ones who were not so good. And he always had a calmness about him, like he really was observing and not being a part of the action. And we're seeing far too much of that today, I think. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I really, the other thing I learned too from Carl Holman, because I used to go home to Atlanta on the weekends and work for the Atlanta Inquirer, which had started to cover the student movement because the white newspapers weren't covering them in detail, and the Black newspaper was beholden to its white advertisers at the time. And while it was the oldest Black newspaper in the country, I mean, in retrospect, I sort of understand. I mean, I didn't understand at the time, and I still wish they'd been a little bit more aggressive. But I learned from Carl Holman that you don't have to be a proponent of something. You just have to get out there and tell the truth about what's happening. And yet, having been through what I went through and having had experience with the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement, covering them, but also covering the things that they were protesting against, or they were protesting. I guess that's not the best use of English language. Protest means protesting against, right? I mean, that's another thing that's bothering me today. I don't know what's happening to the English language. It is just getting so, it's something is happening in our English classes that didn't happen when I was coming along, but far too many of us are mauling the language. But anyway, neither here nor there. I think that while I had to cover things that weren't altogether complimentary about people of color, at the same time, I also felt very strongly that I wanted to write about people of color, Black people initially, in ways that were recognizable to themselves. So it didn't always have to be, Muhammad Ali or Jackie Robinson, although those were great stories. But there were other things going on in communities that needed coverage. It's still the case today that things are going on with COVID that need to be covered. Now, some of that is negative because people are afraid of the virus, many of them, but also because many of them don't have the facility to sign up. There are a lot of people in poor Black communities that don't have this computer. So how are they going to sign up for the vaccine, But on the other hand, I have my orthopedics and others. My husband has written about this too. The need for people to get out there and help our people, my people, get access to these vaccines. Now, I've got a book hopefully coming out before the end of this year, if I can stop getting detracted by other things. Not this, of course.
I'm sorry, we gotta go. Sorry. She has a book too.
No, not this. But it's called My People. And it is a collection of my pieces over the years that have focused on Black people in ways that are recognizable to themselves. And one whole section is called My Sisters. And it just, my editor, who is also a sister at HarperCollins, Sarah Reed, she said, okay, now we can only have, and I'm not going to say how many, but I'm pushing because I keep running across these great stories about Black women and, of course, others as well, like Julian Bond and like Carl Holman and John Lewis and, Vernon Jordan. And so many wonderful people of all races, sexes, but I just think that at this moment, it's really important to let people see us in ways that they don't necessarily always see us. Even today, I was on a program, what's the day? Wednesday, Sunday, with the National Association of Black Journalists. And so many of them talked about the need for greater diversity in the newspapers, on television. Even today, it's 2021, and we're still having some of the same issues we had, not quite the same as 1961, but this whole notion of diversity and inclusion seems to have, it seems to have gone past some people. And so we're going to have to go back and look at our history and what it took us, what we were fighting for then, and what it took for us to have a few victories, because we need to have some more.
And that's why I feel like it is so important at the end of your book, when you discuss your graduation in 1963, that not only do you note, what it was like sitting there, just the two among, 1,600 graduates, but the idea that the campus had not fully come around yet, that you make it a point to note that, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Yes, we graduated, but we can't look at this as, okay, we did the one thing and now everything is better. And you say that as well when you went back to the campus 25 years later to give your commencement address. How did that moment feel after all that you had been through, both that graduation moment when you were sitting and then that graduation moment as you're speaking to the students?
Well, the graduation moment when I was sitting with Hamilton was very wonderful, because so many of the people who had fought for us one way or another had come to Athens that day to the graduation. And so that was a very exciting moment. Going back to do the graduation address was also a wonderful moment. Although I have to say, when I was reading it in the book, I thought, this is much too long. How long did I talk that day? And did those students stay awake? But, it was like the other day, I talked to President Moorhead just a few hours ago, and we're going to reveal what we talked about in a few minutes, but I won't do it yet. No spoiler alert. But I was thinking about that day and that graduation speech, and yet thinking about what it's like today, and what I said back then would I be saying today. And I think that President Moorhead and Alton and all of the people who are engaged in the university today are really striding to make it a more inclusive place. And I think that we got Bugger, and we've got people who are committed to ensuring that the university represents the state. Because, the university, I think that people tend to forget that this was the first institution in the South that desegregated. Now, Meredith gets a lot more attention, and we talked, as you see in the book, with the part where we talked when he was at Ole Miss in those early days when they were fighting to try to run him out of there. And I think that it was because of the greater degree of violence that he experienced, that there's more focus. But the university paved the way, even though it was reluctantly. They paved the way. And one of the things that is in this book that I think is very important is that there was a critical mass of professors there who said, we need to open up this institution and keep it open to these two students. Now, they may not have liked us. I don't know. It doesn't, that's
doesn't really matter.
But the statement was, they need to come back here and not be affected by whatever people think about this whole thing, but they need to be able to matriculate. And I think once again, that sort of thing is important for people to know from our history, because, I hear a lot today about our movement, but it was, the whole student movement wasn't led by Black people, but it was joined by people of all races and colors. And I just think that, again, to understand how we need to go forward from here, we need to look at our history. I remember Julian Bond, by the time I got to the New Yorker as a reporter, he came to speak. He was in the Georgia legislature, and he came up to speak to some civil rights organization. And one of the things he said to them that day was that, we've made our point. We've made the point nationally. Now we need to go back home and work in our communities to change things. It's one thing to be out there demonstrating and raising your flags and raising your signs and so forth, which is fine. But at a certain point, the work has to be done in the community. Like now, here in where I am, there's a lot of work to be done, but not just where I am. I'm in the South, but north, up south, as well as down south. Now, I don't know how many of you saw Charles Blow's piece in the New York Times about reversing the Great Migration and going back. He's gone back to Georgia from New York, where he thinks that there's a greater opportunity for people of color. Well, that's his position. And I know a lot of people have gone and they've made a difference. Just look at the last election. But I think it's a matter of, again, knowing our history and knowing how challenging it can be to make change, and yet how rewarding it can be, because change can come.
Well, I actually feel like this conversation leads perfectly into our first audience question. Yes, guys, please remember to put in your questions, but I know that we already have one that is coming in, and this is from Lucy, who asks, what advice would you give to current students that want to make a difference?
I think you have to decide what your passion is. It could be, there's no telling what it could be. It could be helping other young people get ready to go to college. It could be, it could be none of those things. It's just what role models are important. So if you want to be a doctor, just like Hamp. I mean, Hamilton Holmes, under all that pressure, used to set the curve. I mean, before he got there, the curve in some of those school classes over on in the science department, the science hill would be, the curve would start at 60. Hamp set it at 98, and they no longer hated him for being Black; they hated him for being excellent. So, you don't have to, be an activist. Just be excellent and follow your passion, and be passionate about your passion.
While we're talking about Hamp, Mr. Hamilton Holmes, of course, I did want to bring up what he wrote in your yearbook, which I thought was a very touching, just a very touching captions. Page 128, Dear Charlayne, I will always remember you as one of the most outstanding persons I have known or will know. May you only have the best in the future. A friend always. Now that was before you guys went further on this extraordinary historic ride together. When you look back on the relationship between the two of you, what do you think? What do you feel?
We were so different. Hamp was totally serious all the time. I was not. I was serious a good bit of the time, but sometimes he thought I was a little silly. But it paid off the night that, you see, he didn't know the riot was happening outside my dorm because Killian's place is like a mile or more from the university. And when I got there with the dean and the state patrol, there was a state patrol car waiting to take us back to Atlanta. Well, Hamp's granddad, who was a doctor, had given him a car, and he loved that car. And he wanted to drive that car back to Atlanta. He did not want to leave his car, in Athens. And, you know, even today, some of those small towns along the way from Athens to Atlanta is not the most friendly when it comes to people of color. And in those days, it was, let's just say, not a very safe place. So I was worried that if he had to ride in that car by himself, I didn't know what position the state patrol was taking, but I knew that they would be responsible for us if we were both in the car together. But they could say, "Oh, well, he ran off the road," or I don't know. I didn't want to prejudge, but I didn't want to have to think about it. So I started thinking, now, you know, Hamp hates it when I'm silly. So I'm going to be silly for a minute till I can convince him, being silly, that he cannot drive his car. So I started jumping up and down and shaking him. And so he said, okay, just calm down. I calmed down. I'll go in the car with you. And he went in the car with me. And, you know, we were very different people. Hamilton, his son will tell you, who later came to University of Georgia, Hamilton never made a single friend at the university. The whole time he was there, he never made a single friend. He would leave his classes where he had set the curve at 98, 99, go home to the Killians, quickly do his homework because he was brilliant. He finished 5'8", as you know, and go play football with the boys in the hood because he wanted to play football at Georgia, but because he had played at our high school, Turner High School, and he was the captain of the team. But the officials there told him that he couldn't because at that point, either his teammates would hurt him, or some of the members of the other teams from other Southern schools, because that's who they were playing, would try to hurt him. In fact, they said might try to kill you. Yeah. And he was extremely disappointed. And so he left having achieved the highest you could achieve in scholarship, but no friends. And then he went to Emory and he did very well and became a doctor. But he, you know, I think that's the other thing we need to learn about history, and we need to learn about this moment when there's so many people who are hating us, and we just can't hate. I mean, it's bad for us. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, and Hamp is a good example. You know, he was treated like terrible. And yet some years later, there are pictures of us coming back for the 40th anniversary. And also the governor, Ernest Vandiver, who had said, no, not one Black student will ever attend, came to that event and apologized, just like you know, Governor Wallace in Alabama. He was shot years after he was governor, and Vernon was down there speaking one day and happened to look at the end of the program and who was sitting in the wheelchair, because Governor Wallace had been afflicted from his injury and he couldn't walk. He was there to apologize to Vernon for the awful racist position he had taken years before. So, you know, again, that's what history teaches us. Yeah. And that's what our faith teaches us, that, okay, we got some pretty awful people out there right now, but that doesn't mean that we have to be like them.
Absolutely. Well, our next question comes from Nikki Lemeshka, who asked, many of us have been doing a lot of reading this year. What books have been at the top of your recommendations?
Oh, my goodness. There's so many good ones. Of course, Barack Obama's latest one, or only one, right? Well, actually, his first one, I blurbed. That was before anybody knew who he was. But one of my husband's classmates from Grinnell College years before, he was working for him and asked me if I would blurb his book. So when I met then Barack Obama, well, he was president by then. And instead of introducing myself as Charlayne Hunter-Gault, I said, "Oh, Mr. President, I blurbed your first book." And he didn't miss a beat. He said, "You should be getting royalties." I mean, it was just on Martha's Vineyard. But, you know, his book, The Promised Land, is one, of course. I think that Pennell Joseph's book, is it The Sword and the Shield? It's about how Martin Luther King, again, how people with very different points of view ultimately began to see things in much the same way. So that's also one. Goodness, there's so many good ones out, and they're all over here on my on my bookcase. The Warmth of Other Suns, of course, by Isabel Wilkerson. Wrapped in Rainbows is one by Valerie Boyd, the Charlayne Hunter-Gault Professor of Journalism at the University of Georgia. And she's got a new one coming out with Alice Walker, but Wrapped in Rainbows is just wonderful. And I mean, there are just so many really wonderful books out today that if I had known I was going to be asked, I would have brought all those books that are next to my bed that I haven't yet read. I'm even reading, I put it way up there. It's a book about Common, and it's called Let Love Have the Last Word. It's very nice. It's very nice. And, you know, he just emceed this Grammy program where all of these artists sang the protest songs from back in the day and on up to today. And it was just wonderful. So, you know, I have quite a range of books, and I just read a few pages at a time.
Well, actually, on that both entertainment and music front, I did want to mention also a wonderful documentary that premiered at Sundance from the director Questlove that you just happened to be a part of. This is Summer of Soul. It'll be hopefully coming later this year. But in that film, you not only document the time in which you integrated the University of Georgia, but also your time at the New York Times, where very importantly, and I'll be honest, I did not know this, that the reason why we say Black people as journalists actually came from something that you wrote. Can you recount that story for us real quick before we have to go?
Well, it was a piece that I had covered a story in Chicago, and actually it was Black women getting together who didn't all see things the same way, and that was the whole point of this meeting. And I filed a story on the phone, and when I flew back to New York, it was in the paper, and this was when Jesse Jackson and all those were saying we should use Black, and every time I had used Black in the paper, some white editor had changed it to Negro. So I wrote a memo that went on for 12 pages, 11 or 12 pages, saying why it was that that editors needed to listen to people in the Black community. And the managing editor of the newspaper accepted my argument, and that led to the change to the word Black. But hey, what goes around comes around, because the Black reporters at the New York Times just sued the paper or about to. I can't remember now exactly what status it is, but they're complaining because they don't feel that they're getting adequate representation. So what goes around comes around. We have to keep on insisting on our place.
Well, thank you so much for cementing your place. Thank you so much for cementing my place and teaching us all how we need to continue to fight. And in part of that, we have some big news to share about Voice for the Voiceless and something that is kind of upcoming with UGA's work with that amazing fund. If you want to share that with our audience.
Oh, you're going to let me break the news?
Actually, maybe I think Jaquarius might be breaking the news. We're trying not to give away spoilers, and I do appreciate that you didn't give it away earlier. Right. But I think Jaquarius and I are going to allow you to break the news.
All right. Well, I had a wonderful conversation earlier today with President Moorhead, who regretted he couldn't be with us tonight, but he announced that the University of Georgia will be committing $25,000 to Voice for the Voiceless. And I just think that's so wonderful that when he told me that, I actually shed a tear. And I'm thinking about doing that now. But I think it's really wonderful. And it speaks to the commitment of the university working towards greater diversity and inclusion. And these young people who are doing these stories, I think, are going to teach some of the older generation of journalists about real commitment and exposing some of the things that need to be exposed today.
Well, like you said, it is all about this next generation, our next generation, and of course, Jaquarius's next generation coming up as well, to really continue the amazing work that you have done. And I want to pass it back over to Jaquarius and say thank you again for having us and for giving us space to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, Angelique. And the next time I visit my son in Los Angeles, I'm going to come and see your dog.
Please.
All right. Both of these alumni have strong connections to the University of Georgia, and we can't thank them enough for sharing their time with us today. In 2018, Charlayne Hunter-Gault and her husband, Ron, established the Giving Voice for the Voiceless Endowment to financially support student projects that amplify marginalized voices, advance social justice, and promote global understanding. With grants awarded from the fund, UGA students from all disciplines can undertake projects that give voice to the voiceless and shed light on unattended societal problems. Let's take a moment to hear directly from Charlayne about this inspiration behind the generous gift to UGA.
The Giving Voice to the Voiceless Fund came out of thoughts I was having about my own journey as a journalist and the role that Grady College played in that. And as I've often said, my journey to the horizons, which took me to so many places where people did not have a voice. I decided that if I had any legacy at all, I would hope it would be giving voice to the voiceless. And so I said, well, let me find some young people who might be interested and provide them with a little cash to go and give voice to the voiceless. It's just been my journey.
Thank you, Charlayne, for supporting students like me and my peers. This month, in honor of the 60th anniversary of desegregation at UGA, UGA is hosting a crowdfunding campaign for the Giving Voice to the Voiceless Fund. Tonight's event was entirely free, and in lieu of a registration fee, we hope you'll consider joining the campaign. Our goal is 100 donors by March 31st, and I know we can surpass that goal tonight because we're so close. Friendly reminder that today's presentation is part of the Between the Pages series. We're working on our May book and hope to announce it soon. Thanks, everyone, and go Dogs.